Hey guys, so like the video says, we're going to be taking a look at Amara's brawling tree. This is her green tree. One theme across it is melee damage, and another is defense. So this is the main source of any sort of defensive talents or skills that you're going to be getting. Full disclosure, there will not be any gameplay in this. I won't be shooting anything. So just keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and get into it. Jumping over to the green tree, and that is a class mod. Let me pop that off real quick just so we don't see anything from the green tree. Alright, so let's start off with action skills. We have Phase Slam. Amara leaps into the air, slams down. This has a decent AoE for being sort of like a melee action skill. It deals okay damage. It can be used for CC. One final note about Phase Slam is that of her anointments that say Phase Slam, it specifically means Phase Slam. It does not mean her other variants. We're not really sure if that's a bug right now, if it's intended or not. So just keep in mind that if anything says Phase Slam anointed on it, like a weapon or a shield or whatever, that it does not apply to the other two. Let's go ahead and get into those. Fracture. Amara summons a line of fists that erupt from the ground, dealing damage to enemies in front of her. So this, I've noticed, because of the overlay, the hands kind of have an AoE. You can actually hit an enemy multiple times with Fracture, with multiple fists. It additionally leaves a pool on the ground that deals damage over time. This is not to be confused with a status effect. So her skills in the orange tree will not interact with the pool that is left behind by Fracture. It won't increase its duration. It doesn't actually apply a status at all. So just keep that in mind. Pretty decent. Its one glaring weakness is that you will not be able to attack things in the air. Fracture doesn't seem to be able to target. It's literally just originating from your body forward, much like the rest of her skills in this tree, so you won't be able to hit flying enemies with it pretty much ever. Additionally, enemies that are on like the second story or above in some way will not get hit by Fracture. That makes this a very limited skill. Essentially, you're only going to be using this in melee, and Phase Slam is probably going to be better because you actually get anointed effects out of it. So Fracture is cooler than Phase Slam, just some of the utility and some of the mechanics of how it works is going to limit it. Finally, we have Downfall. Amara leaps into the air, shoots an elemental beam below her, followed by a slam. If we take a look at the numbers here, the slam looks like it's decent damage. The beam, I want to say, ticks about 5 or 6 times, so it ends up being a decent amount of damage. The cooldown is very, very long. Just looking at the numbers, it might seem okay, but there's a lot that's wrong with this skill. So first thing, when you use this skill, you jump into the air. Now, you're only jumping like 5 feet into the air, maybe 6 feet, so you're not really getting above the battle in any way. You're kind of like staying in melee range. Like, enemies can still like point blank shoot you with like shotguns and things. So you're not really jumping into the air, you're jumping like at head level. The beam does last a few seconds, which also means you're basically a sitting duck while this is occurring. One final note about the beam, it goes directly down. So you kind of have to Independence Day with Downfall. Like, you have to shoot straight down, which means you kind of have to run and jump at someone and then use it and shoot directly down at them for like 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds, and then you slam on top of them. It's a very dangerous skill to use. It just takes too long for being a... It's basically a melee skill. It seems like it wouldn't be. Even the icon kind of shows like an angled beam. One thing I would probably say is they need to just change it into a ranged ability. Just have yourself hover 5 feet in the air, keep that. remove the slam entirely, up the beam damage, and just allow you to point the beam, kind of like a Warlock ultimate, a Warlock super from Destiny. Um, I I feel like that's way better and fitting. This kind of like a lot of stuff in here kind of has an Athena vibe from the pre-sequel. If you guys played that, one thing that Downfall is actually kind of okay for is when you use it, you will maintain your current height. So if you want to run and jump off of something, you can actually glide, almost like hover, for the entire duration of the beam. And if you use any sort of emote, you'll cancel the slam. So the slam won't happen, but the beams will continue going off. So that'll allow you to actually like kind of hover across areas in the air and then grab ledges. If you don't cancel it with an emote, you will still do the slam and you won't be able to grab a ledge. So Downfall kind of has an interesting platformer side effect, but in its current state, it's really not useful for anything other than that. Let's go ahead and jump into Augments. We have Glamour. This is one of her best augments. Enemies damaged by her action skills become confused and temporarily attack their own allies. The skill cooldown does get increased. It's, somewhat noticeable. It also lowers the damage of your action skill, but that's not. We don't really care about that. But we also know, or we also note that it works for phase grasp abilities as well. So enemies near any target that gets grabbed by our orange tree action skills get confused. So this works with all action skills. It's really good. One thing that you have to note though is if you convert enemies, they will not take damage from you or your allies' bullets. They are converted into sort of a teammate, and they don't take damage from you. Now, they will still take damage from your enemies that are shooting them, but just keep in mind you're not going to be able to convert them and then headshot them until they die while they're converted. So Glamour is very, very strong, especially if you're dealing in a melee situation where you absolutely have to get enemies off of you right now. It just adds a lot of tankiness to really any build. So moving on, we have Revelation. This is her worst action skill augment in my opinion. It is very bad. So whenever you use your action skill, it additionally creates a Nova when it damages enemies, dealing that damage to all nearby enemies. So Revelation, if we take a look at the damage of Phase Slam, let's downgrade it to 7,000. We can see Revelation takes away 15% of that. So let's say it's 7,000. 15% of that is 1,050. So we actually lose 1,050 Phase Slam damage to get a 1,300 Nova damage. So you can see why that's bad. We're taking an augment to basically get like 250 additional damage. This is not very good. Everything else grants you a lot of utility. Like if we just peek at the other skills, we have Glamour, we have Soul Sap, Stillness of Mind, we have Allure. Like this little itty bitty damage increase is nothing in comparison to what we're getting out of the other augments. So Revelation, you really shouldn't take it. The only way they fix this, in my opinion at least, they wanted to make a DPS skill, a DPS augment. Let it be a DPS augment. Remove the action skill damage decrease, and I would also say probably increase the Nova's size and damage, but I wouldn't increase the size too much because it's pretty respectable right now. But in order for it to compete with some of the other stuff, it needs to be a very good DPS option. Guns just outstrip your action skill in 99% of scenarios. Finally, we have Blight Tiger. This converts your action skill to corrosive damage. Now, there's not as much armor in this game as there was in Borderlands 2. There's not as many robots. So, corrosive damage conversion is okay, but in general, shock is going to be much, much better, and fire there's just more flesh enemies that you're going to be fighting, so you're more often than not going to be converting to something else. But I could see Blight Tiger being okay if you're doing farming runs through a very robot heavy area. So that concludes the augment portion and the action skill portion. Let's get into the skills themselves. Now, this is her defensive tree, so we're going to have to talk about a few principles that Borderlands kind of works around before we can get into the skills themselves. So the first thing is health gating. So in Borderlands, you have something called health gating, and also I believe there's shield gating in this one. So if you have shields, if you have like a certain amount of shields, and you get hit by damage, it shouldn't be able to kill you through the shield. This should be true as well of health. So effectively, whenever you have, or actually, I think the recharger is the only one that can shield gate technically, but in any case, health gating is where you have a certain amount of HP and an enemy can never deal more damage than that. So the game won't allow you to take 99,999 damage. It won't allow you to take that, even if the initial shot dealt that. So what you end up having happen is as enemies scale up and your health doesn't, you end up getting one shot by almost everything anyway. So it's very important to know that if I have 100 health or 1,000 health, it doesn't matter if an enemy is dealing 2 million damage. I will get health gated with the first shot, which I believe in Borderlands 3 it's around 50% is the health gate. So as long as I have over 50% of my health, I can't get one shot by an enemy. Now, I believe in Borderlands 2 that was a lower amount, and I haven't done extensive health gate testing, but I can tell it's a thing. So just keep in mind when we take talents that affect our health, it may not be as effective as you think. So let's go ahead and jump into the skills. We have Root to Rise. Amara gains increased maximum health. So like I was saying, health gating is a thing in this game. Increasing your max health won't really matter if you're taking an insane amount of damage. So if I take 1,000,000 damage, it doesn't matter that I have an extra, 1,000 health, right? It won't matter. I'm going to get health gated on my first shot, and my second shot is going to kill me. That being said, Amara does have a lot of damage reduction potential in this tree. And she also has a fair bit of regen, and all of the regen she has is based on a percentage of her health. So effectively, Root to Rise will increase the amount of health you're recovering per second. So it is a very basic stat, health, but just keep in mind it is a little bit more complicated when we're talking about in-game survivability. I'm going to hop over personal space and jump into clarity. So Amara constantly regens health. The lower the health, the more powerful the regen. So it's up to 1% per point. And this is if she had... Effectively, the only way you get the full 1% is if you have like no health left at all, like 1 health. So when you use your action skill, it will also double. So that means we can get up to 10% of our max health per second. So with clarity, we're actually getting health when we need it the most. And I don't mean that just because you're low health. I mean that because you need to get back up to that health gate. So clarity is a very strong regen skill. I know it doesn't seem like it at first glance if you don't know about health gating, but clarity is very, very strong. Let's jump into personal space. You deal bonus damage based on the distance to your target. The closer you are, the more damage you deal. One thing to note about this is it only deals additional damage with weapon shots. It is also bonus damage. So as far as I can figure it in this game, bonus damage is not actually dealt during the shot itself. It is dealt during the damage phase. So imagine, if you will, damage, every interaction you have with a gun is you fire it and then the enemy takes damage. Those are two separate phases. Bonus damage does not occur when you fire the weapon, only when an enemy takes damage. And I've noticed this with a number of effects. EMP grenade, for instance, deals a small amount of damage to all health types, even though it says it doesn't. But when it hits an enemy, it deals massive shield damage. There's a massive amount of shield damage. If I throw it at the ground and it hits me, it doesn't do that shield damage even if I have a shield. And that's because there's a bonus damage condition. So effectively, when I throw that grenade, the EMP says, all right, send out a scan. What quote unquote enemies, what things are tagged as enemies in this area, deal a bunch of shield damage to them. So bonus damage sort of works like that. So this will effectively, when I fire it, it will calculate the distance from me to the target that I'm shooting, possibly based on projectile duration. Because there are no hit scan weapons in the game, it probably is projectile duration, and then it will calculate out how much bonus damage it should deal based on that time frame. So personal space is dealt at time of damage, not when you fire it, technically speaking. Some interesting things about this. The Febert is not hit scan like I had in my other video, so you can't really cheese personal space with it. I figured if it's based on projectile lifetime and it was a hit scan weapon, personal space would always have its full bonus. This is not true. Febert is not hit scan, it's just very fast, and that damage down isn't any further away than any other weapon. So that actually is one indication that it's not time-based personal space, it's truly distance-based. So in any case, one additional note, personal space does not work with Facepuncher. So Facepuncher is the shotgun that deals melee damage. When you fire the gun, it is a gun, it is a weapon, but the projectiles themselves are considered melee attacks. And if you notice, Amara's weapon shots deal bonus damage. So by the time the pellets get to the enemy, they're not weapon shots anymore, they're melee attacks. So that's one more indication that bonus damage is occurring at time of damage, not during the actual shooting process. So moving on, we have arms deal. This is pretty simple, but I'm going to take some points in it just to kind of show the damage reduction scaling. So I'm going to grab some points in health. If we look at the splash damage reduction, it goes from 12%, and then the next one only gives us 9%, and then the next one is 7, 7, and 5. So this is a very strong skill in general, but just note all of the damage reduction skills that are percent based at least do not scale linearly. So they all follow the same pattern of 12%, 9%, 7, 7, and 5%. This is true of Arms Deal, Helping Hands, and One with Nature. Arms Deal does also increase splash damage, but it only reduces damage from splash damage. Now, most badass enemies in the game, or not most, but a lot of them shoot rockets, which is splash damage, and this is very effective because of that. It's your defense when defense is the most important. So jumping over to Helping Hands, this reduces damage from all damage types, but that's all it does, and only after you use your action skill. So if you don't have your action skill up 100% of the time, like every 15 seconds, Helping Hands is going to have some variable effect for you, but it is a very strong damage reduction skill, just in general. And it also looks cool. When you use it, your little arms that you see on Amara kind of circle around you. We have Samsara. Whenever Amara deals damage to an enemy with her action skill, she adds a stack of Samsara. For every stack of Samsara, she gains gun damage and health regen for a few seconds. Now, notice you can stack this up to 5 times. That's 25% gun damage, nothing to sneeze at, and 25% of max health regen per second. Now, this is only after you have used an action skill. One thing I have noticed, it doesn't seem to last for 20 seconds. I'm not 100% sure why it says 20 seconds, but in any case, it's a very strong skill, and the amount of health regen you get out of it is kind of insane. Samsara with Clarity can allow you to get back up to health gate very, very quickly. So these two skills combined are very strong, and Clarity activates after using an action skill. This activates upon hitting an enemy with an action skill. One final note about Samsara. This tends to scale better with things that hit multiple times, not necessarily have low cooldowns. It's very difficult to keep Samsara stacks up with low cooldowns. So Fracture can hit multiple enemies. Downfall hits multiple times. Don't use Downfall anyway. Theoretically, Deliverance should probably be good with this, but this skill's not very good in general. Tandava can be AoE, and it's alright, so maybe it'd be okay with that. But the big one that I've noticed is Ties That Bind. Every time your chain damage deals damage, it gives you Samsara. And Fist Over Matter also gives you Samsara every time the fists hit something. So both of those are very strong. These are probably your best two with this skill. So moving on to our next row, we have Mindfulness. Whenever you take damage, you gain Mindfulness, and this stacks 25 times. The shield regen delay is okay. Like it becomes very strong at high stacks, but the movement speed is mostly what you're going for here. And the reason I say that is this. The best way to stack Mindfulness in its current state is dot damage, and you can actually do that dot to yourself. So pull out like a level 20 gun, apply a dot to yourself, and every single tick will improve your Mindfulness stacks, and you will be able to go very, very fast. Now, I think this should just change. I think it makes the shield regen delay a much worse part of it. And it doesn't really flow well with this skill tree in general. This almost feels like it was a rush skill from the blue tree. Because if you look at the blue tree, you get max rush stacks of 10. But if you use Phase Zerker plus Avatar, it goes up to 25. So Mindfulness almost seems like it was a rush skill that they changed to the green tree. So I almost want to say they should move Mindfulness into the blue tree and just let it be a rush skill, or reduce the number of stacks to be more in line with like Samsara, and let that movement speed and shield regen delay be more attainable without cheesing it and dotting yourself up. That also being said, if they did reduce it to 5 stacks, they would have to drastically lower the bonuses, but I would still leave the movement speed and regen delay pretty strong. Like, not 25 stack strong, maybe like 10 stack strong, but make it only a 5 stack skill. So, jumping over to Vigor, this is a kill skill. Whenever you kill an enemy with your action skill, grants all allies movement speed. The movement speed percentage is not great, even if you use a comm to stack it. So I would not recommend going Vigor almost ever. It is a waste of points, especially when you consider all the cool defensive or offensive things that you can get. I mean, I would take melee damage over Vigor, even if I wasn't a melee build. Like, I'm just straight up, like, Vigor is not great unless you're really trying to cheese out movement speed for like a race or something. If you're trying to like race your friends, or you're going for a world record in like runtime or something, Vigor is just not good. And Mindfulness is way better than Vigor for movement speed anyway. So we have Find Your Center. That's the final one in this line. You gain increased melee damage. That is always active. Additionally, for a few seconds after using your action skill, you get increased range. The cool thing about this skill, Find Your Center, is that there is a comm that will increase it. So you can actually get this to at least +2. I have not seen anything past a +1 for this skill. One thing to note is the melee damage increases, so you go from 100% to 200%. The melee range does not. So it stays at 75%, and I can kind of show that with the class mod here. So notice the rank that it goes up to is 200% melee damage, and then melee range is still 75%. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that again because I want to do a little comparison below with one of the other skills. But that's the last thing in this tree. Let's jump up into one with nature. Now, this gives us max health, which we've talked about health gating and max health, but it also gives us elemental damage reduction. So elemental damage reduction of your action skill element. This doesn't seem great, but just know you can force it to be better than it is by default. So one with nature gives you one resistance at a time. Now, the reason why that's really great is you have health and you have shields. So if you're a Rough Rider build or something where your shields are very inconsequential but your health is very important, you could go fire, and that may not be optimal for your damage type or whatever, but if you go fire, you will resist fire damage, which is the most dangerous thing to health. Now, you can also do the same thing with shock. If you're like a deathless build or something with a really big shield and you don't care about health, or you have the luck artifact on, one with nature can really help your shield efficiency. So once you get one with nature, helping hands and arms deal, you get enough defense and enough regen with these skills to really abuse health gating, and you can actually get to where you're pretty tanky, like respectably tanky even on Mayhem 3. Now you'll still go down on occasion, but you get very tanky with all of this running at the same time. Now, I'm going to go ahead and put a couple points in here, just so we can get to the next row, because I do want to play around with Jab Cross a little bit. So we have Do Unto Others. Let's try to get through this one quickly, but this skill annoys the living heck out of me, and that's because it's just a straight upgrade from another skill in the tree. It's just so much better. So, Do Unto Others. Whenever you get damaged, you automatically throw an energy orb back at an enemy, or that enemy. This deals whatever your current action skill element is, and it also has a short cooldown. So this deals 3600 damage, has an 8-second cooldown. It costs 1 point. If we go over to the orange tree and we take a look at Catharsis, we'll notice if we got this all 3 points in here, it deal 960 damage. Let's say 900 for the sake of easy math. We multiply that by 4. That's 3600 damage. So even if we stacked up 4 statuses on an enemy, it would just then be reaching the same damage amount as we got from the Do Unto Others skill. They have the same cooldown, the same damage. Catharsis only occurs when you kill an enemy. Do Unto Others occurs whenever you get hit, and it is a seeking projectile, so you don't have to aim it. Catharsis has a small AoE, and unless someone is standing next to the guy you just killed, it's not going to be very effective. So Do Unto Others is just a better, more efficient Catharsis. It's usually worth a point if you can spare it, but there's a lot of cool stuff in this row. We have Guardian Angel. Whenever Amara enters Fight for Your Life, she immediately gains Second Wind. Now, normally this only restores 50% of your maximum health, and it has a 2-minute cooldown. But because we have Guardian ranks, we have Recovering from Fight for Your Life, gives you full health and shields. Now, this really limits our ability to do Roid builds, because our shield goes up every single time we get back up, even if Guardian Angel goes off. So Guardian Angel does count as a recovery, a second wind. So this is regenning your shield as well, which makes it very difficult to use with any sort of Roid shield, the Shooting Star, the Ward, or just a generic Roid shield as well. So, just a little caveat to that, Guardian Angel is a great skill. It can get popped when you don't want it to, or from random stuff. But it's really nice when you like trade deaths with the last enemy in a zone and you can't kill anything, you'll just pop right back up. So Guardian Angel's always worth 1 point. Finally, in this row, we have Jab Cross. When Amara deals melee damage to an enemy, she gains action skill damage and gun damage. Now, the gun damage is only 3% per level. That's not super great, but the action skill damage is very high, 15% per level. So if I take points in this, you'll see that it scales up to very respectable action skill damage. Now, one thing to note, it's whenever you deal melee damage. So Facepuncher always deals melee damage. So if you were using a Facepuncher, Jab Cross is just going to constantly be a damage increase and an action skill damage increase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw on my my comm, and it does have +3 on that. This is not quite an optimal class mod for Facepuncher. Personal space, as we talked about, does not work with Facepuncher, so I'd rather have that point from personal space into jab cross. But let's look at the percentages we have here. That's a 25% damage increase and 120% action skill damage. Very, very strong with the right class mod. So just keep that in mind. Jab cross does have a little bit of gun damage, but it can scale very high. Finally, we have Blitz. This overrides your melee attack every 8 seconds, and it gives you increased melee damage. Now, when you do that attack, you dash at an enemy. Again, a very Athena kind of skill. I think Athena had almost this exact skill in the pre-sequel. Facepuncher does get this damage increase, so if you're doing a Facepuncher build, just don't blitz, just shoot all the time, and you'll always have the bonus. However, Blitz is a very strong melee attack. It does convert it into elemental damage, so just keep in mind if you're currently corrosive or currently whatever, that may affect the amount of damage that you deal. But if you're already taking certain skills like the Illuminated Fist, it's kind of a wash anyway. So Illuminated Fist isn't really bad if you're going for a really blitz heavy build where you're trying to chain blitzes together. So that concludes it for the green tree. If I missed anything, let me know. If I misrepresented anything, let me know. I am still learning too. But that'll do it for this video. Thanks, guys.